You're listening to A Splash More, where we have honest conversations with women who refuse to shrink and aren't afraid to want more. So grab your glass. It's time for A Splash More. So I am so honored and excited to introduce my next guest, Lydia Fenet. You are sort of a jack of all trades, a woman of many important things and powerful moments. And I'm just so honored to have you. I think that your story and just sort of the life that you've created and the things that you're doing on the planet are so important for women, especially in today's day and age. And I'll just touch on the things that I know, but I would love to hear more in depth from you, just sort of who you are and what you're doing today. So from what I know, you're an author. You are lead auctioneer for many, many years with Christie's. You were a global managing director, which is such a huge job. And I can even imagine it's probably a very male-driven space, right? Especially in the auctioneer world. And now you have your own agency where you're stepping into keynote speaking opportunities, really kind of paving the way for women to step into their most powerful self, use their voice. And I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways that I want people to take away from this episode is getting the yes. And I think oftentimes we step into opportunities, and unless we're super clear that we're going to get the yes, we step into it with intimidation and with little hesitation. And in my experience, that never works. I feel like, to all of your points that I've read about you and learned about you, you walk in like you have the yes already, and that is how you approach every single opportunity. So that is who you are to me, and I know that there is so much more to you, so I'm going to stop babbling, and I want to turn it over to you and sort of let you tell us a little more about who you are.
Well, first of all, that is such a kind introduction, Hayley. Thank you so much. It's such an honor for me to be on your podcast. I really think that everything you're doing is exactly what I hope women are listening to and observing and gathering for their own information for their lives. You know, I think going back to your point about finding the yes, walking in with the yes, it was a struggle for me for a long time to get to the point where I am today. You know, you sort of read all of the different things that go into my bio, but as everyone knows, I mean, your bio is really just a list of things that you've accomplished. For me, it's been a 23-year career of adding these things. At the core of it all, I would say that the thing that I love the most is auctioneering. For me, it's always been the greatest differentiator. I started off at Christie's right after college. I worked there for over 23 years, and I was the lead charity auctioneer for the company, which meant that I was taking all these really big auctions around the world to raise money for nonprofits. And I love auctioneering. I think it's amazing to obviously get money from people, but I also think the beauty of my career is that I'm getting money from people to give to other people who need things, or they need organizations that are going to fundamentally help people. And so that's just been a massive driving force for me. But I think on the other side, there have been so many things that I've learned as an auctioneer that are applicable to everyone in life, you know, and that goes from women who are listening to this to men who are just happen to be listening to this. I mean, it really doesn't matter, I believe. At the core of everything that I do, I always say it's about performing under pressure in every facet of my life. So getting on stage in front of 1,000 people, pushing people to bid when they're not sure that they're not going to, or pushing people to bid when they don't think that they're going to, and then ending up with them happy at the end, for me is always just icing on the cake. And I think what has taught me to walk into a room always knowing that I'm going to get the yes because I expect the yes is hearing no so much and getting through it, you know, because really the key to failure is to get good at it. You know, the more you fail, the easier it is, and you stop worrying so much about the failure and start looking for opportunities where you could fail, but if you don't, you're going to gain more strength and confidence. And that for me has been really the last decade of my career. You know, I left a company that I had a great title, Global Managing Director, Christie's Auction House. I mean, those are big titles. They opened a lot of doors. And so leaving that for me really meant that I had to kind of make sure that I could live up to what I had created with that title And now I feel like I'm in a place where I'm so far from that title that I've been able to create my own. And that for me just feels amazing.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And just for my own knowledge, because I've never actually talked to an auctioneer before, and I think it's the coolest job. Um, do you ever get to like slow down? Because I can imagine being in that sort of role. I mean, I only know from like movies and television and all of that. So it might not actually be like that, but you're talking so fast and you're constantly having to come up with the next thing to say and the next, big thing that's going to get somebody to say yes to you. Do you ever have just like a slow down period? Can you even take a slow down period while you're in that moment? And how do you not carry that into your daily life?
No, you definitely can't take a pause when you're on stage. That doesn't work because you are the momentum for the auction. So everyone is looking at you, and if your energy wanes, it's really tough because you have to bring it back. And again, like anything, I think it's just practice. I became a car auctioneer about 4 years ago, and I work for a company called Broad Arrow, and I was their first auctioneer. I'm the only female car auctioneer taking auctions for the big houses, which is really cool, but very nerve-wracking when I first started because
Yeah.
a charity auction by nature is, I'm on stage max an hour and 15 minutes, and that's a long auction. I mean, the longest
Yeah.
auction I was taking before I took on the role of car auctioneer was really, it was 5 hours, but there were two of us, and we split 45-minute one on and one off. And even that is exhausting.
Yeah.
And my first car auction, I had to get on stage. I was on stage for 5 hours without a break for 2 days. So 5 hours one day, no break. Next morning, wake up, 5 hours and again. And I was an hour in and I was absolutely exhausted. I didn't know how to not bring that kind of energy, which you can do in
Yeah.
a charity auction when you get on stage for half an hour. But over 4 years, having now taken probably 12 or 13 auctions, I feel like I get off stage and I'm fine. Like after their last auction a couple of
Practice.
weeks ago, I went out for dinner afterwards. I mean, every other time I was flat on my bed,
I can
sound
imagine.
asleep, because there's, again, 5 hours of energy, 5 hours of talking, 5 hours of trying to push people to give a little
Well, and
more.
connect, right? Like,
And
and to
connect.
connect, because I can imagine I did 2 episodes. I recorded 2 episodes last week, and I came home and I was just
Yeah.
like such an honor for people to share their stories with me. And I love every second of it, but it does take a lot to sort of be who I need to be and who I want to be in these moments, which is somebody who can really listen and observe and pull out the biggest takeaways and make sure I'm connecting and being authentic. And it's just a constant conversation, right, that I'm having in my head about trying to make the right next move. And I think what you do, right, outside of auctioneering is so important because you're sort of showcasing and stepping into a moment where you literally have to be on ultimate on, and then being able to sort of take a step back at the end of it, and that has to be a learned skill. I can't imagine it, as you said, it probably took you some time to get to a place where you could be on, go, 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 and then as soon as that moment is over, to sort of take a step back, because I think that part of it is just as important as I'll take a word from you being the momentum. And
Yeah.
I think for anything that we want to create in our lives, it's up to us. Like, we are the momentum, and all of the big power moves that we want to make, all of the big things that we want to do, we are the momentum. Nobody is going to be as passionate about it as you are, whatever the it is. And so being able to learn that skill of being the momentum, nonstop while you're in each isolated moment, and then being able to step back and just, sort of relax and take a moment. And so I'd love to just kind of offer some of our listeners that, like, what are some tips that you have? Because it can be a lot, right? It can be exhausting.
Absolutely. I say to people a lot, I like to look at life as sprints and plateaus. So I use it even in my messaging with my kids. March for me is a really busy month. I was traveling
Yeah.
a lot. January isn't. And so January for me is the time where I don't go anywhere. I'm at home with the kids. I'm I would like to say making dinner, but I'm not much of a chef. So I'm like putting dinner together would be the better way to describe it, or like trying to figure out what to make out of the fridge or ordering something because we live in New York. But the reality is January for me is a very lovely, slow month. March is not. There are a lot of nights where I don't really sleep. I don't sleep well when I get off stage. I have auction after auction. So it'll be sort of 4 days in a row where I'm just completely brain dead. And so finding the sort of constant narrative in my head, this does not last forever. You are going to be tired for the next couple of weeks. And then, we're going on spring break with our kids next week or this week coming up. Really trying to be intentional about where my energy is, how I'm using it, making sure that I have enough of it to go around because, I'm like you, I have 3 children. And so even when I come home from a trip, like I just got back yesterday I was in LA for this huge event with Elton John at the Oscars and then a big auction. And then Tuesday flew straight to Austin to speak for Chief at South by Southwest and then flew home to 3 kids. So there's no weekend and there's no downtime. And that's the reality of this part of the year for me. But as we move forward, as we get closer to summer, all of this starts to slow down again. So I always say it's, you have your sprints and your sprints are what make your life possible. And then the plateaus are the time where you really try to just set back, take some time. I always think that's my most creative time because my brain doesn't feel like it's exhausted all the time. So that's when I write books or do more podcasts or all of the different things that I do. That's when I use it. It's kind of like a different use of my brain.
And do you find, I don't know, there's like a little bit of like a generational gap between this idea of the sprints and the plateaus and like this constant conversation around burnout. And I think finding the balance is a challenge. I think finding that balance, because on one hand, we're hearing like burnout is not a thing. You don't need to feel, you don't need to go through those sprints to get to those quiet moments. You can create quiet moments amongst the sprints. And I've noticed that a lot of women in my generation, so in like, late 30s and up, have sort of this idea that, yes, I can go for a little while. I can like achieve my goals. I can power through. I can make the moves I want to make and, be the powerful woman I want to be in every single room I step into. And then I can have those moments of quiet when it's a little less hectic. And, as you said, you can just sort of be with your family and put dinner together, and all of the things that we get to do in those, personal moments in our lives. And so do you find that to be the truth also, that there is sort of like this generational gap? And then I don't know which one is right or wrong, because I do hear a lot of my younger friends just being like, no is my favorite word, right? Like I say no to things. I am, preserving my mental health. And I do think that there is something to be said about that. But how do you create that balance?
I think that this is just such an interesting time in life because there's such broad generalizations about what's right and what's wrong. I mean, I have a crazy high level of energy. I just always have. My mom has it too. Yeah. I mean, that's the truth. I sometimes look at my mom, I'm like, Mom, slow down. Oh my God. Yeah. She's in her 70s. And I'm like, please, I don't want to do this. I just want to go sit down somewhere. And I feel like I get energy from doing things. So for me, I don't really want to sit on a couch. I don't want to have a cup of tea and relax. That to me is not relaxing. I'm like itching to get out of my skin and go do something, hiking, or not hiking, that's not true. Go running or, go somewhere with my kids or go see something. And I think that was probably a lot of the way that I was raised. I have 3 siblings and my parents never stop. We just go. But I love that. I don't like being lazy and slow and taking lots of time to sit and do things. And that doesn't energize me for work either. I always find the more I have going on, the more I'm doing. As I said, I was coming back from the Oscars. I was writing a book on the way back from the Oscars. I haven't sold the book. I just decided to write another book just because. That might sound crazy to so many people, but for me, that's really fun. It's like this crazy use of extra energy that I have and the nerves that I have going into something like a big weekend. It's a way to funnel that, to channel that. But that's not for everyone, and that's okay. You don't have to want to have my life. That's not in any way, shape, or form the way I live my life. I don't look around and think, that's the life I want. I think this is the life I want, and I'm very happy in my life. And so I would say to someone who's listening to this, who is in their 20s and doesn't feel like they want to say no to everything, then say yes. I said yes to everything, and it really served me well. My career has been amazing. I have an incredible network of friends and colleagues and professional people that I've met over the years. I've fostered those relationships by saying yes and showing up. But if you're not the person who wants to do that, then don't. You can do whatever you want. That's your life. So I guess what I'm saying is I hear all of this like, oh, well, this generation does this and this generation does that. And I think to myself, like, I have plenty of friends who said no all the time, and they're super happy in their life.
Absolutely.
So choose your lane, do whatever you want. It's your life. Like, don't worry about what everybody else thinks. And it's not, in my opinion, generational. It's like whatever is going to make you happy. However, I will also say there is no substitute for doing the work. And so if you think you're going to shortcut it by saying no, I disagree with that, because I've never met anyone successful who constantly says no to every single opportunity and somehow luck falls in their lap. Like, there has to be a learning curve. There has to be knowledge. Otherwise, it doesn't really exist. And it's an easy way for a house of cards to fall pretty quickly.
I absolutely agree with you. I think you and I probably share a lot of the same personality traits and whatnot. I don't think I could ever do what you do as far as like auctioneering goes, just because
I'm sure you could.
Maybe. I mean, I should never say never, but I am a little more, I think, probably too shy or whatever, even though this is weird because I'm like stepping into this, space right now and creating this podcast. But I think just being able to really say yes to things and meet new people, and that's what energizes me, being able to always have new opportunity. I'm always ready for the next thing, and when I'm not, I don't, right? And so if like there's ever times where I'm like, you know what, I'm just tired today, this is not something that I can take on outside of like being responsible. And I think that's another piece of it is just being responsible for your own path, right? Like being truly responsible for the things that you want to create in your life and not giving that responsibility to somebody else. Because I think that is oftentimes what women step into. They oftentimes are waiting for permission, waiting for somebody to say, here you go, Hayley. Here you go, Lydia. Here's your next big opportunity, and just like have it be. Like that's just not how the way that the world works. And so I'd love to get a couple of moments or stories of how you got, like, how did you get here? How did you get that first yes? What would you say is the first moment that really catapulted your career into what it is today?
Well, I read an article when I was in college about a place called Christie's Auction House that was selling Princess Diana's dresses when I was in college. And I often say, my parents were not art collectors, and I wasn't really aware of anything in the art world. We definitely had gone to museums when I was little, but that's kind of where art stopped for me. And there was something about this article and the way they described this place and this world that just was so fascinating to me, and frankly still is. I mean, the art world is an incredible place. It's where really the wealthiest people in the entire world are transacting. They're selling art and buying art for millions of dollars day in and day out. And I would say 99.9% of the world has no idea. And within this world, there's a very glamorous set of events that take place all over the world every single night of the year, whether it be art fairs or galas or, there's just so many different components to it. And for some reason, this article just caught my 19-year-old eye, and I became completely obsessed with working at this place. And so, to your point, my very first yes came from when I called Christie's to ask about their internship program. This was over 20 years ago, and I mean, I was basically laughed off the phone because I was sort of like, well, I'm calling from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I'm just wondering if there's any potential for me to get an internship in your, internship program that starts in a month. And the woman was like, are you kidding me? These things have been, this is like a 7-8 month out process, and these are all kids of collectors, and there's just no way. And I just wore her down. I mean, I called every day. There was no caller ID at that point, so I just called every day. Her name was Mary Livy, or is Mary Livy. She's older now, but and finally, after I think it was the 10th day, I would just call every day and ask about the wait list. Or I finally asked her the question differently. I said, I know you keep saying no because it's closed, but it's not even a paid internship. Like, certainly you would just allow as many people to come in as possible. And she was like, well, we send the interns to museums and the docents will only take groups of 15. So we can't have more than 30 people because then there's no one to go. And I was like, I don't need to go to the museums. I never wanted to go to the museums. I just wanted to be at Christie's, you know?
Yeah.
And finally she was like, you know what? Fine. You can just do a modified internship. And interestingly, her whole thing was you can do a modified internship. And then if any of the other interns don't go, you can go. And sure enough, you know, everybody else was just there because their parents had gotten them in. They were just having fun for the summer. So I went on pretty much every single museum tour in the afternoon because there was always room because people just didn't show up for work.
Didn't want to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the beginning. And then they asked me to stay after that internship, but I went back to college, obviously, for my senior year. And then I graduated and went straight back. And that was really it. You know, I became an auctioneer 4 years after I got there.
Wow.
And I think about now my path in that you have to have a full-time job at Christie's to work there. But the auctioneering was always what I was really passionate about. And I wasn't an art auctioneer, I was a charity auctioneer, which meant that I was out at night after work. And I was in the events department, that's where I started. So I would finish work at about 8. And then I would change into a cocktail dress if I wasn't in one from, you know, doing sign-in and check-in and doing table cards and stuff like that. And I would just leave Christie's, which is in Midtown, and go somewhere in New York City, get on a stage, and then go home. And so I had this double life. I actually always had this double life where, you know, even I remember having children when they were really little in preschool, and I'd been on stage with Bruce Springsteen at Madison Square Garden with Jerry Seinfeld and this whole group of comedians. And there were 7,000 people on that stage. And I got off stage maybe at 11 o'clock that night. And my oldest child had just started preschool. And this couple was walking out. They're actually good friends of ours now. And the mom was like, were you on stage at MSG last night? Oh, yes, that was me.
Yes.
And it's just always been this hilarious thing. And I think now with social media, it's even funnier.
It's like Superman.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's
Superhero,
almost like I
Superwoman.
have two completely different lives. You know, I was at the Oscars on Sunday night on stage with Elton John singing into the microphone, and then I was at a science fair this morning. Everyone was like, so how was Elton John? He was great. You know, it's just this funny second life, but I've had it for so long that my friends who are friends and have been friends for a long time know that during auction season it's like water for cocktails at 6 or I can meet you for dessert at 11. Like there's never a dinner for me, you know, it's always like one or the other. But it's very fulfilling, and it's been an amazing career. And you know, I left Christie's 3 years ago and started a talent agency for charity auctioneers because I kept getting into these situations where I wasn't available, and then I would send someone I hadn't seen on stage, even though I taught all the charity auctioneers for Christie's, so I knew who the good ones were.
Yeah.
But there were all these sort of other random people who just grabbed a microphone and was like, I'm a great auctioneer, and they'd get on stage, and then I would get a call. They'd be like, this person was terrible. Why would you recommend them? And I was like, well, I've never seen them. You know, I'm always on stage, so I don't ever watch anyone else taking auctions. And a friend of mine was like, why do you keep giving out all this work
Free
you've done?
talent.
People trust you. Yeah, you should actually do this. You should start an agency and really ring fence this so you can be protective of what you've created and make sure the people who are getting on stage should be on stage. And that was kind of the beginning of the agency. And now we're 3 years in. I have 15 auctioneers who work for me all over the country.
So cool.
And it's been amazing. It's so fun when I'm on stage and I'm getting texts from people like, oh my God, last minute question for you. I'm about to get on stage. I'm like, I'll be off in 15. This is what you do, you know? Because I'm like, who knows more about charity auctions than I do? I've been doing it for 23 years. You know, it's like I take 80 auctions a year. Tell me something. Let me explain.
Yeah, tell me something. I love that. Well, there's so many things I want to cover over the, you know, that period of your life. And the first thing I want to say, Mary Libby, is that her name?
Uh-huh.
There needs to be more Mary Libbys in the world. And I know that it took you a little bit of time to sort of like break her down, but a lot of the stories that we've shared over this podcast, the last one in particular that actually just went live today, is we talked about just being a yes, like being a yes in a no world. Like when somebody is showing you that they are, you know, persistent, that they want to really work hard, that they have a good idea, that they want an opportunity, it's so much easier to say no in a moment like that, right? But especially for women, we need to start saying yes to each other. We need to start saying yes to showing up for each other. We need to start saying yes to hearing an idea, to opening doors when we have the key to them. And so I love that she did that for you. And I know that a lot of that was on you also, which is another part of this that I want to bring up is just, to anyone who's listening, there is something to be said about continuing to like knock on that door. And it
Yeah.
really is a conversation with yourself about rejection and what rejection looks like and what it means. Because if you had been intimidated by that first no, right, by that first step of rejection, we wouldn't be here today.
Right.
It doesn't sound like you are the type of person that would have taken that first no, which you didn't. But I think a lot of times people don't take it to the next step, right? They just stop because they get a no, and that's just it. And they're like, well, one person said no, or one time this one person said no. And I love that you had this reframe about changing the question when you went back to her for that last time when she eventually said yes. It's also an area of opportunity for people to look at their strategy, right? And I think a lot of times when we're, trying to achieve something, I'm trying to achieve something right now. And, I've had a whole long career, and I've had a lot of yeses in my life, and I'm getting a lot of yeses right now, but it's something new. I've never done this before. I've never had a podcast. I've never put myself center stage before. I've always been behind the scenes, and it's just a new role for me. And so I'm finding myself constantly having to fight through this conversation around like rejection or fear of judgment or whatever you want to call it. And so I love that you also had that perspective at 19 years old. And again,
But
it's probably, yeah, go ahead, go, please.
No, I was going to tell you, it's so funny. As you were talking, I was thinking, I had a young woman, a couple of years ago, it's probably 3 years ago, but right when I was starting the agency, I got an email from this young woman named Susan, and she said, "Hi, I'm applying for an internship to your agency." And I was like, "My agency is 2 months old. Like, there's no internship, there's no
It's me.
anything."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's me, and I'm figuring this out as I go. And I kind of read it, and there are two things I would say to this. First and foremost, I say to people, make sure you follow up with me if I don't get back to you, because there are times when I'm in a sprint where I don't even check email for days
Yeah.
because I just don't have the mental capacity to hold everything I need when I have 4 auctions in a row. Like, I can't be reading emails and doing podcasts. Like, the only thing I'm focused on is getting my kids to school,
Yep.
doing what I need to get done during the day, and then getting on that stage. And then everything else just falls by the wayside, and I'll pick it back up. So if you email me on a Tuesday and I have 4 auctions in a row, you're going to get buried at the bottom. And the chances are I probably won't even read it for a couple of weeks. So
Right.
by sending it to me again, I just might happen to be in a plateau where I'm sitting, during the summer I have 0 auctions, except for I have 1 in July and 1 in August. I play tennis every day. It's bliss. And
that.
I have plenty of time to read my emails. And I actually schedule a ton of informational interviews during that time because I know it's slow and it's not going to get in the way. I won't have to cancel or reschedule. And so Susan kept emailing. And then she called me out of the blue. It was Labor Day weekend. She called me out of the blue, and I was in the car with my mom, and I picked it up. I thought it was someone else, and she said, "Hi, it's Susan." And I said, "Oh, hi, it's Lydia. Can I call you back?" And I hung up, and I said, "This girl is so persistent. It is crazy." Yeah. I was like, "I don't even have an internship." And my mom goes, "Lydia, she probably read the first chapter of your book, which is about me stalking the internship order." And I was like, "Oh, I have to reward that." So Susan ended up as my intern. I literally created an internship program for Susan the next summer. I had 3 interns. Such an amazing woman. I can't even tell you how much I learned from having those 3 young women. They got my newsletter up and running. I mean, it was like all these things that I needed to do, I didn't have time to do. I was like, there's no way I want to manage everyone. In reality, it was a hugely successful thing, and I loved it. And she just got another job at an auction house. And I wrote her reference, and it was so exciting. And so I think about something like that, and you're right. I do believe a lot of times it has to do with the timing of it. I think it also has to do with just not being afraid of the word no, and just always remembering that in sales, the statistic is 9 to 1. You get 9 rejections for every 1 acceptance. So if you're getting more than that, you're killing it. My first book, I had case studies. I think I asked over 100 women to do case studies in my book, and there are 33. And that book, it was a bestseller. And everyone's like, that was so successful. I'm like, no, 90 women basically were like, no thanks, I don't want to be in your book. But
Yeah, like so
30
many
did.
people. Yeah, 30
Yeah.
did.
So you got to celebrate the wins and realize that, people have other things to do. They can't always do what you need to do on their timing. But 2 years from now, when you see them again, something else might work.
Yeah, that's so true. And going back, another big point, which I'm sort of like jumping all over the place, but as you're telling your story, I'm like, oh, this is really important to share too, or to highlight. So I too, but this was in my, younger years. So in my 20s, I had sort of this like crazy double life myself. I was working in the music industry, and ironically, Elton John was one of the artists signed to my label at one point.
Oh my gosh.
And, I was constantly yeah, is constantly in spaces with really big celebrities and, going to parties and going to shows and doing a lot of stuff that like I never dreamed of doing until I lived in New York City, of course, and all these opportunities were more available. So I had this life, and then I had like, my hometown life, like where I came from, and people would be like, wait, what do you do? Like, how did you do that? How did you get into that? And it was this like weird, just like double life that I was living. And one thing I talk about often is that I have always struggled to find a balance between like being that kind of person and wanting to be a wife, a mom, all of the things. And it sounds like you've seamlessly been able to do both at the same time. And I want to hear a little bit more about that, because you didn't stop at any point, right? Like when you were having your kids, and first of all, did you take a break?
No, I didn't take a break.
No,
I didn't take a
you
break.
didn't
But I
take a
had been
break.
at Christie's at that point for 12 years when I had my first child. And so, in many ways, I think I'd sort of built in the sweat equity. I also ran my department at that point. And so,
Yeah.
I remember going out for my first maternity leave and saying to everyone, oh, I'm sure I'll be back on tomorrow after I have the baby. And then
Yeah.
I didn't get back on for almost 4 months. And I was like, hello, I'm
Yeah.
back when I finally went back.
Yeah.
I was lucky because the women who worked for me were younger, and I think that it was good for them to see me take that time off. Ultimately, they took maternity leaves working for me too, and I
Yeah.
feel like in many ways, in very many ways, set a really good example where I was like, I'm going to take this time and I'm not going to apologize for it. And I will come back as the person I was before I left. And I actually love that person too. And so for me, a lot of it was really the realization. I remember crying and crying and crying when I went back on that first day after my first maternity leave. And then I got back to the desk where I'd been seated for basically 12 years of my life. And I looked around my office and thought, like, there's something really nice about this part of me too, because there is another part of me that loves this
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And I think from that moment on, I felt like the switch from 0 to 1 was the biggest switch for us, because in many ways it was sort of trying to figure out how we were going to make it work. We're
Yeah.
lucky in the sense that my husband's family lives 45 minutes from the city. We have the only grandchildren on both sides with aunts and uncles. So my children are surrounded by hands that are always like, give them to us. We
So
want
much
more.
help,
We want
yeah.
more. So much help. And, we had a wonderful nanny who would come Monday through Friday while we were both in the office. And I was home by 5:30. I would leave work in the 5s to be home by 5:30. And so I structured it like that. And I didn't really ask anyone to do it, because I think at that point, especially at Christie's, there weren't a lot of women having children who were my age. We had a lot of very senior men. There were a lot of women who were older than me who didn't have children. And I think I just sort of created this rule set that I was going to follow, and I didn't ask anyone. I just did it. And ultimately, I think it worked out very well. But I would be lying if I said that it wasn't a struggle. Sometimes I still struggle with mom guilt. I posted on social recently that I looked at my spring travel calendar and was like, oh my God, every time I get on a plane, I'm so excited about the opportunity. Also, my heart is like, oh God. And so I said to each of my children, like, pick one of the trips, and you guys are going to come with me. Each one
I
of you
love
gets to
that.
pick a trip. And that has made the spring so much better. So my little one came with me to Florida. And because I've spent so many years with these organizations, I tell them, and they're so excited that my kids are coming. So they gave my daughter a seat, my 9-year-old. They put all these toys so that she could like sit and draw during them. And they brought her up on stage during the paddle race, all on their own. My oldest one is coming with me this weekend to Arizona for an auction. And so I think that like doing things like that, trying to figure out how, if I don't feel good about it, how I can make it feel better. If they're upset about something, how I can figure that out. That's been a large part of this. And then I think, my husband and I have over the years kind of gotten to a place where we're in a good place in terms of the way that I travel. He doesn't travel for work, luckily, so that's been wonderful. And I think the biggest and the best decision I finally made a couple of years ago. I mean, this is many years into having kids. So again, I don't think we did it perfectly for a long time, but I used to really quarterback when I was traveling. I'd be like, well, what about this? And what about this? And I think part of it had me letting go and my husband realizing I was letting go and walking into that. And so it's like, if I'm not here, I'm not trying to get involved in all the daily activities. I just take my hands off. And just let him do it, because he knows as much as I do. I mean, he works from home, he's around all the time. And so that's made it a lot easier. But, I would say to anyone, I think all of us are doing the best we can. I often say that we're about to get a puppy, and I feel like half of our life is just held together by duct tape and popsicle sticks. And we're just like hoping for the best,
Yeah, that's true.
But I think that's okay. I don't, kind of going back to what I said, it doesn't work for everyone. If you're a super type A mom who is packing snacks for your children into 15 containers, like, you are an amazing woman, and I bow down to you. I am shoving cookies in my mouth as I shove them into my kids' mouths as we're walking out of school, because I'm just so psyched to be at pickup, So I think you have to let some of it go. I think you have to give your partner, and your partner has to give you a lot of grace for the things that don't work out the way that you want them to. But I think if you're facing in the right direction and both of you are trying your best, then that's the best you can ask for.
I love that.
But you know what, Hayley, I'll also tell you, I went to my daughter's science fair this morning, and I was in there, and the science teacher and I actually went to high school together, bizarrely. And he came over and he said, I really wanted to tell you, I don't know if you knew this or not, but your daughter gave a really lovely speech about you in chapel last week. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? And I said, really? I mean, this is my oldest daughter. And I had just been feeling awful because I had missed her basketball championship because I was on stage for these massive car auctions that I'm contracted into, and I love it. It's just like the craziest, coolest job, but it is the same weekend as her basketball championship. And I had been at every basketball game her entire season, and that was the one I missed. And they won, and it was a huge moment. And I was so disappointed that I wasn't there, but I was also so elated because we'd done so well in the car sales. And it was just like this, it was just such a high-low moment. Yeah. And then when he told me that, she did that 2 days after they won the basketball championship. And he was like, she just gave this really great speech about how inspiring her mom is to her and how her mom shows her that she can do big things. And so I do also think they watch everything we do, and they learn by watching what we do. And, the beauty of my older daughter is she does so many things that, even though I did miss that one basketball championship, she plays on another league, and she also does 2 musicals, and I'm going to see both of those. So, I try to put myself back into that place where I'm like, this is all, everything you're doing, they're seeing too, and there's value in that. But yeah, there's no perfect answer.
No, there isn't, but there's also such beauty in, especially being a mom of a girl. So my oldest, my 3-year-old is a boy, and then I have a younger who's a girl, and she's only 14 months old. So I'm new to this whole, being a mom of a girl thing. And I'm hyper aware of everything that I'm doing and how I'm talking to her, how I'm talking around her. And I know she's still so little and won't remember most of this stuff, but I am really excited for her when she's older to come back and to look over the course of my life and see these moments where I'm getting to talk to people like you. And, I'm really trying to create a space of growth for women so that when she gets to be of an older age, these resources are already available to her, and these conversations don't have to happen as heavily because women have just sort of stepped into who we are always meant to be here, right? We are powerhouses, we are powerful voices, we are doing big things, we have big ideas. the episode that I released today, we talk about how women by nature reproduce, and we continue to iterate, and we continue to come up with new ideas and do new things. And we have this uncanny ability to pivot when something is like not going right. And I really want to be able to tell stories like that, and to have her be able to look back and be like, wow, my mom is a badass. And
Yeah.
I know that your daughters are going, your daughter, I don't know if you have multiple, but at least two. Okay, great. They will look back and say the same thing. But there is this, journey in between from when they're babies to when they're older, and they can really look back and see all the moves that we are making to sort of like create a life for them later that they can like fully step into without hesitation. But this moment in between where we're like, there's a lot of questioning, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of like, how do I find the balance? How do I do both things? Is there space for both things? And so you are an exceptional example of that. Just somebody who is like really living the biggest like life, and also being a good mom and whatnot. But anyone who's listening, I want people to know there's space for all of it. Like you can live like Lydia, you can like have this giant life and like be standing on stages and really using your voice in a way that someone like her does, while also being a good mom and finding the balance of like things that she has to miss versus things that you don't have to miss. Or you don't have to choose that, right? Like you can choose a job that's a little more standard to your lifestyle, that allows you to not have to make those choices if that's not what you want. And I think the whole point of this is like, there's no right or wrong. There is ways to be a leader in your life in different capacities, without having to be like the star of the show every single time, and also be a good mom. And so I just wanted to kind of like highlight that moment, because I think it's lovely that you are a mom, but you are also like living this big life. And I think, someone like me, I look up to that, because that's what I want and strive to do. I did have a big life. I do have a big life. But now I'm in like the trenches of babies and like trying to figure out what my next is. And I'm like, how can I step into the things that I really want to do, and also be a mom to these little babies the way that I want to be, and find the balance of both. So all things are possible, and there's lots of tools and ways to do that.
100%.
So in any capacity, right? It could be in any moment, whether it's like in a job role, if it's in a home role, if it's in like a friend role. We're going to be asked at certain points to like command a space, to command a room, to step in and be a leader. And I think a lot of times women are afraid to like ask for what they want, and to really step into like their own voice without feeling like they have to change who they are and like adjust who they are as a human to achieve those things. And I'd love to know, just because that's really like the biggest takeaway from this, is like, how do you command whatever space you want to step into with full authority in the way that feels authentic to you, without losing who you are and feeling like you need to change? What would be your biggest advice on that?
Probably the biggest advice I have about how you just walk in as yourself is to practice and practice and practice not changing. And I know that sounds crazy, but think about the way that you're speaking, right? When you walk into a room, I hear so many people affect accents, or their voice goes up or their voice goes down. Just think about the way that you speak to a friend, and really that's how you should be coming across in all manners of your life. When I get on an auction stage, for me, there's no difference between the way that I would speak to you or I would speak to my husband or a friend. I always say it's like the fun version of me. It's like the best version of me is the person who gets on stage. It's certainly not me, at midnight where I'm like, please get in your beds, kids. It's really just me who's having fun and trying to encourage everyone else to have fun as well. So whoever you are, and I always say too, like, ask your best friends, like, what is the best version of me? What version of me do you find is the kind that people are drawn to? Like, that's exactly what you should be bringing into any situation, because that's ultimately what's going to help you succeed and thrive. And it'll also make you feel like the most relaxed version of you. But walking into a room and pretending you're someone you're not is not a great way to build confidence, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to keep pretending you're that person. And when you're pretending you're someone that you're not, it makes it really uncomfortable. And the day
Yeah.
seems really long when you're pretending you're someone you're not.
It's true, and people can read through that really easily, is what I'm
100%.
learning.
Yeah.
Is like, has superpowers, right? And everyone has like their own unique superpowers. And I think one of my superpowers is being able to create space where people just automatically feel comfortable with me. They automatically feel like, they're at home, they're at peace. And I love that. Like, that's something that I love about myself. And anytime I walk into something new or a new experience, I have found myself in the past adjusting that. Like, I need to be perfect, or I need to be more professional, or I need to be less vulnerable, because that is what makes people feel comfortable. I do find myself to be really vulnerable and open, and I don't really have a problem sharing and, talking about things that don't work out and talking about my flaws. And the minute I've found myself walking into a space and trying to be perfect and say the perfect thing, I feel like people always can see right through that, and it has
Yeah.
the adverse effect, right? It's always the opposite of what I want, which is people are like, this is weird. I don't like what's happening here.
Yeah. This isn't
So
you.
this isn't you, yeah. So figuring out like what your superpowers are and what makes you unique and special, and that is like the sort of energy. So it doesn't always have to be like the loudest person in the room or
No.
the one that has the boldest thing to say. It can sometimes just be whatever your superpower is. And, for you, what would you say is your superpower?
Confidence.
Confidence, yeah.
Yeah. Feeling really comfortable with where I am and who I am. And I think that shows across every stage that I'm on. And
Yeah.
I truly think that's why I'm good at my job, because I don't walk on the stage worrying the way I did when I was 20. Is everyone going to like me? Are they going
Yeah.
to like my outfit? Now
Right.
it's just like, this is who I am. And I have built this skill over 20 years. And I know that if I'm going to get on the stage, I will work as hard as I can to get as much as I possibly can for the nonprofit. And then when I get off, I will have done my best. And if that
Yeah.
is not good enough, like, that is the best I can do, period.
Right, right.
And that for me feels like a true superpower.
Amazing. Okay, and so one thing that we love to ask, it's it's called a splash more, and it's really like just highlighting stories and showcasing women that are living not only like the biggest, best version of themselves, but like that extra, like being that extra thing that we're often afraid to be. And so you've done so much, and I am just curious if there's like, what is that next thing? Like, if you were, I know you've written books and you've done all the things, but like, what is that next thing that you haven't maybe said out loud that's like in your heart, where you're like, okay, I'm afraid to say this out loud, that this is the next thing that I want, but this is what it is. This is my extra. Do you have something like that on your heart?
I mean, the next step for me is really to pull all of these things together into a multimedia platform. So that's the part that I don't really talk about a lot, but in the back of my mind, that's where I'm headed. So it's sort of all of these dots connect into one very concise thing that becomes something much larger. And that's really what I'm working on behind the scenes, just even in my own mind, in the conversations that I'm having with people, really thinking about what that looks like and what that next step is.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Always thinking about something.
always thinking about something. We keep iterating. That is absolutely true.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, and
Oh my
I'll
gosh, my
definitely
pleasure.
be in touch
Absolutely.
soon. Thank
All
you
right,
so
I
much,
look forward
Lydia.
to it. Good luck with those
Okay.
babies.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to A Splash More. If you like this episode, make sure you like, comment, share, follow, subscribe, and let us know if there's any topics you want us to cover in the future. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.